The leader is not the person that is the smartest in the room. They're not necessarily the person with the most knowledge. They are the person that's able to recognize each individual skill set.
What are some characteristics of good teams and some characteristics of bad teams?
What allows me to be successful is really delegation and trust. You can only properly delegate if there is trust in your team.
It's a pretty common saying. There's a difference between being a leader and being a manager. What makes an architect, a good architect, a good leader?
As a leader, that architect needs to make sure that everyone working to get that vision achieved.
I kind of want to flip the script and ask you, as a leader, what makes a good team member?
One of the biggest enemy of progress is apathy in the team that can lead to the issues you see in teamwork. So we went a year developing something that clearly would not work. But after reviewing it, the decision I had to make was we need to can all of the work we did for a year. That is not an easy news to be. In providing that solution, it is important to be able to first understand the whole, break it down in this part, and as an architect, really put them together.
Would you consider this approach that you take to be more scientific, or is it an intuition?
I think it's very important to, one, understand.
Hey everyone, welcome to the channel, the Citizen Developer channel. My name is Griffin, the host, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Cheik Kone. Cheik is a senior solution architect and team lead at Hitachi Solutions, which is a Microsoft partner that specializes in delivering global IT solutions and largely related to Microsoft Dynamics and the Power Platform. Now, Cheik was first introduced to the Microsoft suite through Microsoft Dynamics GP when working for another payment solution software company. And he then made the jump into consulting and got experience as a support engineer, a developer, a business analyst, and ultimately an architect. These experiences gave him a well-rounded view of the consulting world, especially when it comes to Microsoft technologies. Cheik, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Griffin. Glad to be here. And that was a riveting introduction.
Yeah, it's funny. It's hard for me right after I read the introduction. I find in every episode, I'm like, yeah, I'm super excited for this conversation. I find I say that in every single episode, right? But I am truly. I wanted to start our conversation on a topic that we really haven't touched on much so far in this series, and that's specifically around leadership and teamwork and how that applies to the consulting space and even just, the IT consulting space and working on a team and different things. I wanted to ask you, what are some characteristics of good teams and some characteristics of bad teams that you've been a part of?
Thank you, Griffin. I think this is a very, very, very interesting topic, especially when dealing with consulting. So as we know, looking at consulting generally, it involves getting specialized specialists in certain fields to come help companies solve complex problems that they can't otherwise always solve on their own. So by definition, we are looking at very complex tasks most of the time, depending on who you ask, that require coordination and that require to put together a group of usually very talented people and have them achieve a goal. And so easily one can see why that requires great teamwork. It's one of those areas, as with other things in the world, where to achieve great results, you need good collaboration. And at the heart of good collaboration is a good leader. A good leader, I think, really allows for a team to really exude its maximum potential. And in our consulting space, that means you can get project done faster, more efficiently. So in that instance, you make money by being able to get more work and get your consultant happy because they get to solve complex problem. And more importantly, your customers are happy because on the other side of it, they are also getting a solution for their issues and they're getting good solutions. So I think the leader of a consulting team is sort of really the spear point to make sure that everyone is working in harmony towards that goal. And so it requires someone to really be open to ideas, to provide a space where people can contribute, because I think it's important. The leader is not the person that is the smartest in the room. They're not necessarily the person with the most knowledge, but they are the person that's able to recognize each individual skill set in the room, and that is able to allow each individual skill set to shine and to really perform at its best. So there's always the sport analogy that's there. And interestingly enough, I was just watching LeBron James podcast with someone that I used to not like. I'm a Kobe person, but I do recognize his leadership abilities. And speaking of one of the reasons why the Lakers lost to Denver, he put it in terms of Denver has a group that is working really well together, and they have a coach that never plays to the weakness of his team. It's always playing to the strength of his team. I think it was um, a slight jab as at their own coach who got fired not long ago, but it really highlights the importance of a good leader. A good leader really makes all the players in that team shine at what they do best. Whether they're a good defender, they're a good offensive player, they're a good cheerleader, they're there for moral support. All of that matters in trying to achieve big goals.
I know a great way to get people fired up in the comments is to say that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time and not Michael Jordan. But and maybe that's just because I was raised in the LeBron era, not the Jordan era. But I can respect greatness. All right, but
And let's not
but it's
forget
LeBron.
Kobe in the conversation.
Yeah. Look, my wife is from Los Angeles, so she's
Yes.
a Laker, a Kobe fan, absolutely, and no disrespect there, but no, I think that's a great point. One thing I also wanted to mention is it's a pretty common saying. You can be a leader, and there's a difference between being a leader and being a manager, right? You could be a leader and a manager. You can be a leader, not a manager.
That's right.
You could be a manager, not a leader. And I think that same thing applies to a leader and an architect, or a leader and not an architect, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? The difference in the similarities, and what makes an architect, a good architect, a good leader?
And that's a very good distinction to make. As architects often are in leadership position, but an architect is not always a good leader. And the architect on a project, from my perspective, one is in charge of making sure that the solution, generally that's being provided to the client, follows good best practice and standards. So essentially, that they are just like the term implies in house building. An architect makes sure that all of the home comes together and that it is foundationally sound. And then the architect also adds some of those extra that makes a product stand out. The same way you would have 10 houses on a block, and there's the one house that looks slightly different because the architect can really bring a vision that not only uses fundamentals, because that's always at the heart of every solution. I think best practice and making sure that we are delivering a well-rounded enterprise-ready solution is what an architect needs to do. And two, also making sure that it fits specific needs. So for different industries, you got architects that are specialized. So that's more on the architecture side. As a leader, that architect needs to make sure that everyone working to get that vision achieved is able to fully contribute and understands, I think, first, the architect is responsible for the vision. I'm a big believer in you can build better something that you can visualize. That there are people that are very comfortable working in silos or working in terms of something that they can fully visualize. They're very artistic. I've always admired painters. They can put something on a canvas and make it come to life. For the rest of us, we only see it at the end of that painting and appreciate what they're doing. But there was a point where it was just a blank sheet of paper or blank canvas. And so the architect often finds themselves there. But they're not the only one painting that canvas. They need people to contribute, to bring color palettes. And these people need to understand what they're working towards, because I think when they do, the end product often reflects that in terms of the quality of it. So a good architect is able to really motivate and is able to drive the vision and to really drive the value that everyone adds Because once each of the team members understand the value that they bring to that group, then they can work to enhance that value. Or at the very least, they understand the impact they have on others when their work doesn't meet certain standards and whatnot. So really driving the vision as the leader. I think an architect plays that role on a good consultant team.
I think there's something you mentioned there that was good, and it almost starts um, to get into the conversation of delegation in a way of, as an architect, you need to, you could be a good architect and know the software, the technology, the best practices and the licensing and know everything out there and be a really good architect.
Right.
But unless it's a super, super small project, which we regularly aren't necessarily too involved in at Hitachi, there's no way you can implement an entire project by yourself, right? And so you have to be able to lead others and delegate. This is a question that might be on the spot, but what's your experience with successful delegation, and or what's a maybe a bad experience you had where you didn't delegate?
Um, First, I think you hit it right on the nail. I think delegation is really one of the biggest weapon any leaders has. The president of the United States is not building roads, but the president of the United States will come up with a great infrastructure program because that is something that we all need, and understands that we need people to deliver at the highest level. So we'll find the best company to build a road. So as an architect, I think understanding the strength of one's team starts there. What that means is first, one of the first role of an architect coming into a large project. And personally, I do like enterprise level project that I had a lot of experience working on those. And as you mentioned, you often finding yourself, really leading a team of 20 or more people, sometimes 50, that are doing various activities during the day. And so you can quickly see how that piles up. There's a lot of moving pieces all at once, not to mention developers from other group that you might be working with. In this large integration project, we have dynamics, which is my area of expertise, but you could very well be working with someone from FNO or someone from a totally different team. The current project I'm on has um, a lot of vendors working together. So we have other companies that are also working in the same environment as us. So part of leadership also involves interacting with them. And what allows me to be successful is really delegation and trust. So when one talks about delegation, I think trust follows right after, because you can only properly delegate if there is trust in your team. And this is why establishing that trust is a very key feature of a good leader. It starts by making yourself available to your team so that you can understand who they are individually, spending time sort of building that relationship. And I think that starts first with the leader. As you mentioned, it's important for an architect to know the work, because understanding what the work entails make sure that you can give work to people and you have a good sizing of essentially what that work entails and if it's within their means to be able to complete it. And if it isn't, it also allows you to assess what would they need in order to be successful. So delegating is an art in itself. I think often the concept of delegating can have a negative connotation if it's I'm just throwing work at people and I'm not involved in it. That's not a good leader. A good leader creates work, and in at Hitachi we go with an agile framework, which is a well-established methodology. And part of the mindset of agile is establishing this sizable piece of work that we call PBIs. And this is why it's the architect role to define the PBIs, really work with the customer to come up with these acceptance criteria. That's essentially capturing the essence of what needs to be delegated. This is where an architect gets a chance to give their input around, well, let me frame this task that I want to delegate around this very clear principle of what we want to build. And there's a collaboration there between the consultant team, led by the architect, the customer, where they get to give their input. This is what I would like. And with that small frame of work, it can then be delegated to a consultant to actually execute them. It can be then delegated to a QA team members to test it, and then it can go to the customer themselves to actually validate that all of that work get together. So that ability to take a framed up scope of work and then have it move to different delegation and get it to a point of final state is critical to the agile methodology. It is really sitting on that trust between this different group efficiently working together, and the end product of that is the solution that we deliver. And I think it really all is based on the ability to deliver.
So I think what you said there is great. And I think while regardless of your role, you have an opportunity and arguably a responsibility in to be a leader in some way, shape, or form, right? Even as a consultant or anything, right? Um, Now, with that being said, I think a lot of what we're talking about and a lot of just the leadership stuff out there is about, hey, here's what leadership is, here's how to be a good leader, here's what you need to do to become a leader. I kind of want to flip the script and ask you, as a leader, what makes a good team member, what makes a good follower, where you're talking about being able to delegate and trust in these people that you're leading. They obviously have a certain leadership role that they're in as well, and are leading themselves, leading their lives. What what makes a good follower from the opinion of a leader?
Good question. That's a good question. Um, One, I think myself, in some instance, we all play as, and you really highlighted that well. We flip in our daily life between a role of leadership and a role of following, because while I might be a leader at work, there are times that I have to listen to my wife. It's not optional; I have to. But there are times where I lead there too, and similarly in other scenarios, I am helping somebody complete a mission, so I would play the role of of a follower in that sense. For me,
I was let me just say, when at home we're all followers, all
that's
right,
right.
to our wives. That's all I'm saying. All right.
I know in
So,
the
but
comment,
continue.
some people might say they're not, but
Yeah.
I don't want to be trouble. She's the boss. So, in that sense, I think it's very important to one, understand the vision and adhere to it. So that's where I think when we start in a concept, when we allow somebody to lead, because I adhere to servant leadership. That's a concept, and I would recommend for everyone. There's a couple of really great books around servant leadership out there, and that is a style of leadership where the leader really is at the service of the people that are being led. So it really prones a more hands-on approach, where as a leader, the main goal is to remove obstacle in the way of the people that allowed you to be their leader, so that they can achieve their full potential. So that point of view then means that a good follower to me is able to clearly express their needs from the leader. So in that sense, one, I need to be able to have a clear idea of what they are comfortable, what is their skill set, what they would like to do. So in that open communication, there needs to be a very straightforward, here's how I would like to contribute and how I think I can maximize that contribution. That conversation needs to happen. If there is alignment, is then a maintenance item, because again, now that trust is established. I got a good understanding of this is your role on the team. You have a good understanding of it. We have a compromise, and we have clear line of communication open. As a leader, I think that's very critical that you have an open line of communication. And as a team member or follower, you need to leverage it. So that means that when a leader makes himself available, he trusts that if there is a need, that person is able to escalate or to raise their hand when needed and say, "Hey, I see a problem." Because from my perspective, within my role, I'm working on this problem, and I think we missed something. And so I'm comfortable enough to raise this to my next escalation point, which is your leader, so that it get addressed. And I think once that is done and established by a good leader, it then falls onto a good follower to really use these tools, because that is the power they have. Two, I think it's also important to have an open mindset, to agree to have someone, essentially lead and represent you in certain areas, and also to want to grow. That's a big one for me. I think even at Hitachi, that's one of our pillars here. I think a good team member should always strive for growth, whatever that means for them. Because one of the biggest, I think, enemy of progress is apathy. So when people get comfortable and they're not seeking to grow, um, I think that in the team that can lead to some of the issues you see in teamwork, because we're not looking at different ways to solve issues. It can lead to frustration. It can lead to people looking at more of the issues rather than looking at solutions, which is another, I think, good quality to have as a follower. When you identify a problem, I think you should also come with both a problem and a potential solution to that problem. Not just expect the leader to solve everything, because if that is not a very efficient way to go about things from my perspective. And I think that can stem from either leader not properly setting up this expectation and letting team members know that they can contribute. But if they do, then it's really the responsibility of the followers or the team members to leverage everything that is allowed to them, for them to grow and to eventually look to become leaders in their own right.
If you are thinking to yourself that you want to get into low code development or learn about the Power Platform, then I want to personally invite you to sign up for this completely free self-paced course that is going to cover everything you need to know to begin low code development today. Not too long ago, I was a complete beginner and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know what the Power Platform was. The content in this course is handpicked by me so you can understand the basics of the Power Platform and ultimately be prepared to take the PL 900 certification if that's something you're interested in. If you are interested, be sure to follow the first link in the description down below, and do not forget to use the promo code YouTube at checkout in order to get the course for completely free. This is going to give you immediate access to the entire course so that you can start to change your future today. Now, let's get back to the conversation. I love that. Something you mentioned on that I want to elaborate is the importance for anyone on the team member, leader, to ask questions and raise potential concerns or issues early. What could you speak to that, and maybe your experience of, if there's a good example out there you'd be willing to share as well, where something that was raised early, was it ended up saving something, or somebody just held on to some sort of information or something that was bugging them and then it ended up hurting the project?
Very bad. Sure. I won't obviously give specifics, but at a high level, one of the worst example of that that I could think of is a big project I was involved with. This was a very large insurance project, and when that project came in, I was brought in to essentially fix an issue that was highlighted primarily because things were not going well. And I think at that time, no one really raised their hand. I think the project team knew that things weren't going well, but never communicating that. So they spent almost a year out of a 3-year project going the wrong direction. And it's only after a year through a major failure that the customer was made aware that things weren't going well. So there was a very reactionary. So this was a really bad place for that consulting company, because there was a loss of trust. There was a lot of money that was already invested in that project. The solution that was being developed didn't really fit what the customer wanted, and that was because there was no feedback loop. So in that sense, when we talk about a good consultant team, that also includes the customer, right? In our job methodology, especially here at Hitachi, a team is not just Hitachi team members. That includes people on the customer side that are part of that team, POs and others, because the feedback is important. Because they need to see what we're doing at every point, and they need to be able to say, "Hey, yeah, that looks like it will work for us. In our company, what you're doing will work," or they can say, "No, this is not how we do things." You need to react to this and move. That collaboration didn't happen. So I don't think there was trust in that project. And so we went a year developing something that clearly would not work for the customer. So that's the example of what I would say there is an issue with the team. There was no communication, there was no trust. Obviously, when I came in, one of the first thing I had to do as an architect, which was a pretty scary thing, I'm parachuting in into a new situation. And there was already an existing architect there, which is even more pressure because he's obviously threatened by a new architect coming in to take his job. But after reviewing it for 2 weeks, the decision I had to make was we need to can all of the work we did for a year. That is not an easy news to give. And so the politically safe way to do this would have been to say, well, we can continue this way and try to make something work that's not there to avoid breaking down a bad news, and especially coming in as a new resource, that integrity to be able to say, yeah, we messed up. This is not what you need. We need to scrap it and we need to start over. But before giving that news, I took some time to think of we can start over, but we can give you what you need and we can do it faster. So that was the challenge. Now, doing that decision, I had one of the longest flight home because that was a tough news for that customer to swallow. Obviously, I remember when somebody puts their hand on their head after you announce it, that's not a good sign. But I think that was really a turning point in that relationship because they appreciated the the fact that the facts were laid bare on the table. They were made part of the decision. Is this is what we need to do, and then the second part of it is that looking at the project team, I didn't put the blame on them. To me, this is the other responsibility of a leader. Is also when things don't work, is first the responsibility of the leader to acknowledge it, not just the team. This is where I think there was a big difference between the existing architect and myself, because his perspective was I gave the right direction, the team didn't execute. My perspective was if the team didn't execute the vision, it's because it wasn't well communicated. So we'll take that blame. Now let's work with that team to realign. I was pleasantly surprised because they redid a year worth of work in about 4 months, and they did it the right way. So for that project, that really set up a great turnaround. Now we still had to work really hard to correct it, but one of the big differences is that I was on the ground with that team, saying, "What do you need so that we can do this right? This is what I want." I was attending calls every day. We had members that were in offshore in India. I actually traveled to India and made sure I spent 2 weeks with the team there. And that ended up being one of our team that was outperforming some of our team members here. Whereas before the perception was that that's where the gap was. So what that really reiterates to me is that we are looking at different cultures and different ways to approach things. One thing I did realize is that the Indian teams had a more hierarchical way of thinking. So they were waiting for clear direction, do this, and then they do it. Whereas in the US, we have a more horizontal approach where everyone is really more able to make decisions. So when dealing with we had to establish the rule of engagement, and I had to go there and let them know that look, if you guys have ideas, I'm open to these ideas. I want you to contribute. And I was surprised that once I opened that door, I did get what I asked for. I had plenty of meetings of people that had great ideas on how we could actually design the solution. Those ideas had been there, they just weren't comfortable sharing them in the previous environment. But once we opened that door, a lot of them were able to really come up with new ideas that I didn't even think of as an architect that were really effective. And that allows us to save a lot of time on that project and to deliver it on time eventually. And I'm happy to see a couple of those ended up actually with promotion, out of that exercise. So it really turned something that started out really bad into a very positive experience overall.
That's awesome. I could probably talk about leadership with you for a whole hour still. But I want to transition us onto another topic. I think everything that we've shared is great, and that's a really cool experience that you were able to have, and like to get your boots on the ground and with all the different people involved on the project. Um, to transition us, after getting to know you a little bit, you said something along the lines of, as an architect, you like to take the approach of breaking complex problems down into their parts in order to simplify and understand them. Would you mind just explaining what you mean by that?
Yes. Excuse me. So actually, there is a saying in French, which is my first language, by the way, for those that says that the if you translate it roughly in English, is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that means that everything that we are is really a combination of many different elements that come together. But just putting all these elements together doesn't make a person. For example, you can put the heart, skin, all our organs together, but you are more than just a collection of organs. There is something unique about that, and that's my approach to projects. So every problem is really a combination of multiple components um, that are there to define that final solution. But the solution itself, as it is in final, is greater than the sum of its part. But whenever something breaks, we need to first understand what makes up that solution. In the same way that biology or doctors to heal us need to understand how our organs function together. I think for an architect looking at technical solutions, not every company is the same, right? And that's where my analogy around the whole, each company is different. There's a different culture, there's a different set of people there. But when you look underneath, it's a sum of different parts that are often very similar that come together to make a solution for a company, right? HR system, a CRM system. They're different. There's different variations of it. They are implemented differently, but at the heart of it, there is parts that are recognizable. And to provide a good solution, especially nowadays, we often don't get to start from scratch. We often are looking at existing systems that we need to either improve or we need to upgrade. People from a different age. It's always looking at a company and its culture. In providing that solution, it is important to be able to first understand the whole, then break it down in these parts, and as an architect, really put them together in a way that it doesn't impact the essence of what that company is. Because I think other architects or other people that work on transformation project will often see that one of the toughest nut to crack is change management. And this is why we see a lot of OCM group that are there to help with that aspect of software, which is often overlooked, which is having people understand what you built and being comfortable actually using new processes. Because at the end of the day, we make software for humans to use, and human comes in all shape and forms, habits, and preferences. And so I think that aspect needs to also be part of the architecture, especially for us as consultants, because we want to offer ultimately a solution that our customer likes. And where I often say the right solution is not always the one that they want that will work for that solution. So we cannot always just go by it has to be technically sound. There are other items that we might consider as we go into it. Sometimes an Excel sheet is the way to do this because the person that uses it is really more comfortable with an Excel sheet over something more complex that they wouldn't adopt.
Would you consider this approach that you take to software development to be more scientific, or is it an intuition that you've been able to learn over time? And this might be a tricky question, but it kind of sounds to me when you're talking about, connecting all of these different complex parts and kind of putting them together in your head and see how they all come together. To
Yeah.
me, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but how could I learn to do that?
That's, that's,
Right? And
that's a great
um,
question.
yeah, go ahead.
And this is where I think I often do think that, as you saw in my background, I started as a developer, and then slowly transition into more of a functional role today as an functional architect. I do think that really approaching a software or a complex implementation is very similar to an artist. It takes an artistic mind to me to be able to essentially create something out of nothing, and that's where there is a non-scientific approach to it, because I do think it's a very unstructured approach, and there are many styles that you find. And to me, that's where, as you move away from a more consulting-based roles and into an architect, that's where some of this non-scientific intuition comes in into defining overall your style, right? And that's why you will not find two architects that are the same. I think those styles vary. The foundation of it is based on sound scientific principle. That's the best practice I mentioned earlier. There are certain things that need to happen for a system to work well together. Those, I think, need to be based on good science and good best practices that change, right? So a good architect is always learning, because the the technology is always changing. We are in the era of AI. I think AI comes with a whole new set of ways of thinking, and people are gonna leverage the AI tool in many different ways. But there's the ethical aspect of it that an architect will have to consider. But there is also just pure scientific aspect of what AI does. But because we make tools for people to use, we also have to consider the ethic. We have to consider security, scalability. There's a lot of items that need to be infused in there, and that's where experience and perspective comes in. And this is why I think diversity is a strength in a company, because it brings all these different perspectives to standard technical knowledge and allows to provide a broader solution, because people see the word differently, and the people that use it also have different ways of using it. So eventually those different architects taking on different problem helps the whole community grow, helps solutions become more and more robust over time. So I think architects are artists. That's my point of
I would agree. You have to. People always talk about have problem solving skills when you're growing up, but it I truly feel like architecting, and this could be like your example of building a house. It could be exactly the same, but this idea of bringing all of these different ways of thinking and ways to do something, because I mean the Power Platform and Microsoft Dynamics, there's 7 different ways you could meet a business need,
that's
but you have to be able to critically think about you know 1,000 different points from all of your blueprinting sessions a few months ago, and like, oh, someone definitely mentioned this, or this
right.
user experience is like this. Then you have to be able to
Put it all
you have
together.
to lean on some intuition.
Yep, and the
Like Mike.
personas, and this is why we bring in as many people as possible in order to capture really all these point of views. And the best solution is somewhere in the middle. They're not always perfect. I think every architect would tell you, you're almost never done with a product. There's always things you can add to it. And I think finding that right balance is something that comes over time, because you want something that is functional and that is ready to go. I mean, if perfection is the goal, that is also very hard to obtain. So it's something you pick up over time, as you said. I think the more experience you get under your belt, I think it really helps grow you as an architect, because you see different problems, different ways of solving them, and then you're able to pull from a larger library over time, and that's why a more experienced architect is able to do that someone with a little less project experience wouldn't be able to. But I do also think that that new point of view, it's also a strength sometimes, because we can quickly fall into habits. And as I said, one of the key skills to me is constantly keeping that mindset of growth, constantly be willing to look at new perspective. In the tech space, you always learn. You always have to be able to incorporate new point of views.
Yeah. What you mentioned, we just a couple minutes here, but I still wanted to ask you. You mentioned that you had previous experience as a more technical role as a developer. What made you want to transition from having that technical background, being a technical developer or a technical architect, into now being more in the functional low code space?
Well, I think for me, and as you said, it's really personality really plays a lot into um, where you end up. Because I've always struggled because I could have gone a more literally route. I enjoy as much as I can code and do some C sharp and do that. I usually also always had a need to understand the big picture. For me, even as a coder, I'm more efficient when I understand, what I'm coding rather than just that little silo. And so over time, being on projects, I often found myself with other leaders that I had, being in that position of really kind of putting solutions together because I was able to meet the customer needs, and I attribute that a lot to having been in a support role early in my career, where you often at the end of an implementation and that are using the product are calling to report issues. And so to help them, you have to understand what it is that they're using, how they're using it. So for anyone out there, send a shout out to all my support people. It's a tough job, it's customer service. You understanding really what issues people are going through on a daily basis. You also understand what are some of the pitfalls of software that is not well designed. You're going in there and having the knowledge. Often I was going in the code, making slight changes, and that's actually one of the reasons I moved forward. But that made me want to be able to do it right. And to the point that I mentioned earlier, not always just sitting on the side and saying there's something wrong with this, but also proposing solution gradually kind of pushed me towards, hey, you actually get more of an impact designing the overall solution and providing that feedback for the people that use it than just implementing it. And so naturally for me, I felt more reward being part of the overall process. And as a functional consultant, I think you get a direct impact in how people want a particular solution to work, and you're able to really feel that and put it all together. When it comes out and people use it and they like it, I get more satisfaction from that overall than the code that's really more in the back end. People don't really know that, oh, I wrote this logic that does this piece, but the full solution I think gives me more joy. So that's why I eventually moved to that side.
That's awesome. This has been super fun. I want to transition us, stop talking about work. I want to switch to our the after hours happy hour segment of the video. And in getting to know you, you shared that you have a passion of just listening and learning about the tech space and the growth of technology in Africa, particularly West Africa. I would just love to open up the floor to you and ask you, yeah, why?
Well, to me, first, I grew up in a couple places in West Africa, between Senegal so my first interest in computers started there. I mean, started playing video games, and then first time you get in front of a computer, I would probably age myself, but when I first started using computer, we still had to use floppy disk to actually save things. Um, but to see that technology as it grew really took different directions. So I'm always been passionate about having developers with different perspectives because, as I said, I think people solve problems very differently. So having traveled to India, seeing how the tech space has grown there, some of the solution that they were able to come up with. Last time I was there, I saw some really cool things. Whereas the police in India now can digitize tickets. So I can give tickets in the street. You see really creative way where technology and the advancements of it impact population. I started seeing the same in West Africa. So one of the main area was around mobile money. So the mobile space is really growing there, and it's even faster than it does in the US. And that's really based on the way people approach money there. So then people have more mobile money transaction than actual cash transaction. And so there's this whole ecosystem of solutions that are coming out. Um, and so I spent some time down there. My brother and I, who's also in IT, actually, spent a lot of time educating and doing session with young developers from Ivory Coast. One of the big challenges that they have is the language barrier. Understanding that not speaking English, it's a big barrier to having access to general code knowledge. So here, most people get stuck. They go on Google or on the forum, and you have access to a wide range of people with explanation. But seeing there that they have a lot of time, great ideas, but just being able to find the right resources to sort of figure out how to use this code or how to use this API, they're often stuck because of the language. Are things that we're looking at ways to essentially bridge by trying to provide more content that is accessible to developers there. And I think just opening up the space, because to me, the tech industry is wonderful because it has this open source concept where it's the mind of the collective that comes together very well, and information is freely shared so that people can advance it and then reinvest into the collective. I think that's really the Ubuntu knowledge we talk about. It fits well with the African mindset, and seeing developers kind of growing on their own, often with no resources, they go and find it and have the passion for it. I think really excites me. I think there's great potential there. So that's where I like to continue investing and really put more light on that, so that there are more resources available for people. And I think then they will create the future applications that will be helping solve specific issues on the African continent.
That's awesome. The conversation has been great. Like I kind of said earlier, I could probably talk to you about everything we've talked about for another whole nother episode if necessary. But um, to wrap this one up, Cheik, if people were wanting to, heard this conversation and wanted to connect with you, what would be the best way to reach out and connect?
I am on LinkedIn, Cheik Kone. You can find me there, and also you can get in touch with me through my personal email. We'll make sure to have some information available. But definitely, also at the Hitachi, I am a team lead there, as you know. So we'd love to be able to meet some of you and continue this conversation. Really love the work you're doing, Griffin. I think this is definitely what we need more of. And it was a great conversation, and looking forward to seeing more of it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, all the links will be in the description or the show notes down below. Thank you to you for sticking to end the video. My name is Griffin Lickfeld, the host of Citizen Developer, and I'm excited to connect with you guys in the next one.